Go.
All right, we'll call to order the Social Service Committee meeting today, October the 1st. And we do have a quorum present. And if you will, please present the agenda so everyone can see it. Becky.
Can you see the agenda?
Yes, we can. Okay. Do I have a motion to adopt the agenda as presented?
I move to adopt the agenda as presented.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And aye. Any opposed? That stands adopted. So I guess, Dave, do you want to start us off?
Sure, I can just give a really brief summary as to what brings us to this point. In 2020, based on actions of the board and recommendations of this committee last year, all of the services provided by not-for-profit organizations, as opposed to being funded by a lump sum in prior years based on a detailed application and review by this committee and interview and so on, recommendations to the board. For the current year, all those services were converted to contracts, if you will, or agreements of a fee for service, invoices for services provided on a month-to-month basis. It's actually the second year for the juvenile court services for the placement program for the juveniles. But all of those organizations were converted over in 2020. It appears to be working as intended. And so therefore, it brought up the question of even the need for this committee to function in that regard, since there is no more awards of lump sums to not-for-profits based on detailed applications and interviews and review. So from this point forward, the board itself, and even with the finance committee review for funding if need be, can move forward with those 7 contracted services as the board sees fit, and they're still funded in the budget. And that's it. That's the summary.
And just from my historical perspective, when I got on the board in 2013 and was asked would I serve on this committee, only thing I had to go on was my former United Way experience and budget and allocations. And my first reaction was, why is the government getting involved in making decisions with taxpayer dollars going to nonprofits? I just found it so absurd. And then when I finally, and I think that was the general reaction that every elected official had when they first got into office, was, what the heck are we doing? But then when you finally discovered, that it was from the courts and what it went to, and it was really government agency like money, and what the decision. And then though it usually wound up being a little taken aback, because then politics always enters in some way. And I wanted the process to be more transparent. And I wanted the process to be more, more like the United Way process that I had been a part of in the beginning, that there was more accountability. And that's where it got a little bit more cumbersome, that they had to bring their audits and or bring, more of a presentation that the public could see, and it be more open, and that it was more regulated, and they went through a process of saying what they were going to do with the money. And then it did provide that we got to see more and hear more, and it became more, we saw some things that people didn't like, or it became more obvious. Well, then juvenile court changed tremendously, and Superior Court got more involved, and they decided that instead of just we were doing the review process on some agencies, and they were doing invoices on family and children's services DFACs. We were doing more of an invoice-like service. Then we started doing it more on staff, and then it just sort of snowballed into Robin and Wayne started doing more of that, and it just became and everybody. And as we did that, then Ruth's appointment came up, and Ruth said, I don't see really a need for us. You know, I don't see what we're doing, you know, on this reappointment of what role do we play? And that really caused me to stop and reevaluate, why are we doing this? You know, and so I reached out to Robin first. I talked to Molly, asked Molly's opinion. I asked our chairman's opinion. And then I asked Ken, and he said, well, really, it goes back to the court. And, you know, it's under the jurisdiction of the court, the committee is. And so I reached out to Robin, and Robin talked to the judges. And Robin, do you want to share what the judges said?
Sure. They didn't see the necessity of having to have a social services committee to give out dollars to what are really mandated services. So regardless of what the social services committee does, we are still obligated to place children into these, like Jesse's house, regardless of what is set up by the social services committee. I mean, it could be far less and it could be far more, but we still have to do it. So on you know, I guess it's about 2/5 of those agencies that get money from the social services committee, they're mandated services. I think there's about 3 other ones that don't fall into that purview. But it doesn't make much sense for you guys to have to get into the political arena and give out money that we have to use anyway.
Right. So Ken said we could take it straight to the board and it be just a board resolution and the board do it. But I felt like that we've had this social service committee and we should get a recommendation from this committee to absolve this committee. And y'all should know what's going on. You've put a lot of time and effort into it, some of you for a few years, and that we should be, you know, treat this committee. It's much cleaner to get a recommendation from this committee to, I guess, absolve or to approve a resolution to absolve this committee, than just go straight to the board with it. And then y'all read about it in the paper. That it would be much better to have a meeting of this committee and let the committee make the recommendation of it rather than the board just do it. It does require board action to do it. The agencies that fall under the purview of the court will still be funded. It won't be that they'll just be not funded and now they won't.
Right.
You know, I mean, they will still be funded, but it'll just be per invoice and not have to come through the actions of this committee, which was, you know, really, we weren't making a decision about the allotment anymore anyway. I mean, it was occurring over the invoice of it.
Right. Now, the one thing that we did like is that it required the agencies to give us a unit price, whereas before it was just kind of all over the place. And that's something that we would like to keep doing with the agencies.
Dave, how could we maintain that?
Sure. We'll just bring back all of those agreements to the board again with the rates in it. And you recall we put a maximum funding amount so we're able to at least control the budgeting and the funding for these purposes. And again, if they use up all of that, I think we're going to have one to the board this year with the court support. The board can always increase the maximum funding and apply budget to it. So there is a budgetary limitation there. But again, publicly, we're paying for actual services provided.
So then we would just come with an agreement with the agency of this is what the unit price is.
Right.
Instead of before where it was all different costs. And now we can pin it down and we can predict, you know, what our budget's going to be and predict for next year, you know, what we're going to need.
Right.
So
and
that part was good.
Yeah, and we're already gathering those numbers for next year from all the organizations. So we'll
Mhm.
we'll have that.
Yes, so it allows us to project into the future.
I mean, I'm hoping that the board, and it'll be a board decision, but I'm hoping Ron will continue to help fund that gateway counselor, and the board will agree to do that. And it came from social service funding, but that's a board decision.
Right.
You know, that'll be a board decision to make. And they'll have to come and present and ask the board about it.
So Robin, you had mentioned that 2 out of the 5 agencies that come and ask for funding are mandated. But then I also heard that all of them were mandated.
No, there are some like Mentor Me that we don't make placements to. And so that kind of falls out of our purview. I think it's the Center for Hope and Healing, which is more between, I guess, the DA's office and the sheriff's department, or the sheriff's office. And there's one more, I think I don't recall right away, but they would have to approach the board for funding in a different way if you choose to dissolve the Social Services Committee.
I believe the other one was Family Haven.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So the funding will stop for those organizations unless they just come to the board and just ask.
Right.
Just ask
Right.
for
It doesn't have to stop. They'll just still involve agreements with the board. The board still has to approve it.
What about with defects? Is that
This committee used to look at that, but that's moved over into a separate account line, and that's still funded.
okay?
That's always been on a reimbursement basis, so that's still going on an actual cost basis.
Dave, on this, if I may, this is Commissioner Cooper. If I
Sure.
may on this, particularly with Family Haven, if I recall, there was some changes to our document, our contract resolution, whatever, with Family Haven, as far as our payments go. And Ken is not on yet. I know was sort of doubled over with another meeting. And I think we need to check into that, because I understand what Robin is saying, but the criteria for Family Haven and perhaps the other organization that you named, Robin, what is it? Hope and
Healing.
Hope and
Children's
Healing.
Center for Hope and Healing.
Right,
Thank you very
right.
much. Yes, those two that don't fall directly under the category of the juvenile court.
Right.
However, we made some changes on that, and there was change with our resolution, our ordinance, whatever with that. So we need to refer to Ken when he's available and clarify.
Right.
Because they're
And
not
legal
just-
does.
Yes, it's my understanding is all that we will be doing is the changes, of course, will be going to, which has already happened, to the the invoice base per service in lieu of any lump sum. And I think that, of course, is across the board, but that there are organizations that would be included under the county,
Right.
can go to the county under those circumstances, under that.
Right. And legal does review, actually they help draft. They review each of those agreements to make sure they're appropriate. And I'll just add, and specifically for Family Haven, we have gotten, again, an updated rate schedule. I think there's about 5 different services with specific rates, and there is a maximum dollar amount that they're subject to and we're holding to.
Well, as with everyone.
Yep.
Yes.
So I'm sorry, I'm going to make sure I'm understanding, because I'm newer on the committee. So now that there's regulation or procedures in place that the board can manage distributing funds, that there's the invoice process, that is how the funding will be allocated and distributed based on their recommendation. So that's why there would not be a need for this committee. Did I get that right?
That sounds right to me.
Yeah, and now that it's being an invoice type, everything's being invoiced back, and it's always been under the purview of the court. That was how it was set up. And when the court, even when the court was being managed differently, Rusty Jackson had to sign off on all of it. That's always the way it was before I was elected 8 years ago. He had to sign off on all of it. And it was always supposed to be under, and when Judge Jackson became not the chief juvenile court judge, it just became where Judge Willis wasn't comfortable signing off on these things that weren't truly under his purview. Am I saying that right, Robin?
Yeah, I think you're correct. I mean, for example, the Boys Lodge is easy. Signing off on, do you think Mentor Me should get money, or even Family Haven, where you don't touch at all, was uncomfortable for him as a judge to say, yeah, I think you should give them this amount of money.
So will it go back to like reassessing like which agencies the board gives financially to, and will there be how will the communication be to those nonprofits that aren't under this mandate? How will that communication be handled to them so they can prepare for, you know, not receiving those funds?
Well, no one said they're not receiving funds, and it's working right now. Go ahead, Commissioner.
I was just going to say that it's pretty much the agencies that are working with juvenile court are already getting reimbursement, are already invoicing right now. I mean,
For example, I mean, it's mandated. So if we have, and I'm just making the numbers up, we have Boys Lodge, and if you gave them $40,000, if we still have to place young men in that home, we're going to go beyond that, regardless of what the Social Services Committee allotted.
Okay.
But it never made sense. You just sort of put an artificial amount, but it didn't mean anything to us because we still paid out of our budget that extra cost for having to house children.
So the agencies would still be funded. It's just they're going to go directly to the board to invoice.
Well, maybe just semantics, but no agency is getting funding from the county for the agency. Okay. We're only paying for units of service. So if they provided no service, there'd be no payments to them.
Right.
Gotcha.
And as we get invoices for service, we're paying for them at an agreed upon rate each year.
Before they started doing this, the way you're thinking about it, Katie, was the way it was being done. They were getting just a lump sum money.
Right.
And so we were allocating, say, $60,000 to Boys Lodge. And that was causing great discomfort to juvenile court because they couldn't tie it to an invoice. They couldn't tie, I mean, it was hard for them to break it up. And all of a sudden, when you looked at, say, a SAFT invoice and it was $60,000 or $80,000, and they were trying to tie it to invoices, it was giving an appearance in their mind of like a double billing because there wasn't enough. And then if you looked at a SAFT invoice and it was tied to all of a sudden you had a child that was in DFACS and you had DFACS getting funding, it was getting all convoluted between, so DFACS was getting funding for that child, SAF was getting funding for that child, and it became just a web. So it had to be broken apart once they started looking at this one child, and it was, and I'm not saying that was what was occurring, but it just gave that perception. If you looked at this funding and the county was doing the funding, so the only way to break it apart and make it have an appearance of being clean was we had to do it by invoice.
Right.
And it had to be treated as an invoice for service. And so it's much, much, much better now.
Right. I think Cindy said it very well. It cleaned it up very nicely. And we also had children that were from other counties that we shouldn't even have paid. But the other part of this is when you give a lump sum to some agencies, the money that was given was far above what we needed. So we could have only used 20,000, but you gave them 60,000.
And I mean, when you look at, here we were as social service, And all we were looking at was trying to use this committee to help the courts. And the courts were trying to use this committee to meet the needs. And then, I mean, you look at when we weren't doing, I mean, how quickly something can turn so political. And you look at, I don't even know the correct name to call it, but when Family Haven was asked by the courts to do that, the visitation, I don't even know for what, the Superior Court visitation.
Yeah, for divorcing families, that they needed a place to have a visitation safe for
And
children.
we got, and Robin worked with them and got that all set up, and then that blew up and turned into such a political monster, and nobody saw that coming. Nobody knew that was coming, and that's just how easy that things can blow up and turn into something political when the Board of Commissioners didn't see that going to occur. The courts didn't see that going to occur, and that could and should have never happened. So I mean, it's just so easy that if hopefully this will have doing this and letting it be treated more like a business and doing it with invoicing, and that way nothing can be misconstrued again. There's Ken on the call, Molly, if you've got a question for him.
No, only thing that I had a question on, hey Ken, is that didn't we make some changes with the agreement with Family Haven? I know that it has gone to invoice as the others, but since Family Haven had its own sort of, did not directly fall under juvenile court. And do you recall when we had those numerous meetings about that, and then there's something changed with our agreement with Family Haven and how we share any funding that goes to them via invoice?
Commissioner, the only thing, I don't remember the details of any specific discussion except the bigger thematic element that has been that we're going to an invoice only service-driven paradigm for all of the recipients of the funding. And I think we adjusted our contracts this year to provide that for all of them. I think it started actually with DFACS is what I seem to recall.
That's it right
has
there.
Been the one.
Yes, I didn't mean to overtalk you, pardon me. It was just, you just said exactly what I was referencing, but you said it much better. And that it would just, it broadened the scope a little bit because it was in reference to all of them. And that was it. The changes of our contract for that. Thank you.
I do think that we need to be, all of us, need to be mindful of dealing with agencies that, in any way, that only have audits and that, that are extremely well financed and vetted, because that was why I wanted it set up so structured, because we had people come before us asking for money and Dave knows, that tried to get their foot in the door, that Ken saw them too, that when they heard the county was giving away money, here come all kinds of people. Oh, county's giving away money. Oh yeah, we want it. And that puts you in a very strange position that none of us, I definitely wasn't comfortable being in that position. It was free money. Oh yeah. It's like, no, that's not, that's not where we are. Is there anybody else? We'll miss y'all. But is there any other questions? Kim, we've went over the why and the judges, and that they're good with it, and that the court's changed, and it's under the purview of the court, and it's not that they're not going to still get funding. It's just that we're strictly invoiced now. And the thing is, it was really, as Robin described it well, it was really putting somewhat of a fake ceiling, because if Boys Lodge had more people using it, it might go over what we were projecting. you know, it was on a use-like basis.
Right. No, it's, I get it. And it's certainly a program that has morphed over the years. I don't remember the exact date that it started, but I think it was in the early 2000s. And then it got much more rigorously documented in the 2010 era. But I think the main driver, the main catalyst has been, candidly, from my perspective, just a change in the juvenile court. In many ways, when it started back in the early 2000s, it was juvenile court driven. I can even remember some of the first meetings. And it was always kind of difficult because local governments doing something called the grant program is always a little precarious anyway, which is why we had some of the certifications. I know that Robin, you and I dealt with sort of the court's evolving feelings about those certifications. And that all made sense to me. And so, Commissioner Mills, I think this is candidly the natural culmination of where we've been going for about 6 years. Maybe
I know
longer.
the chair, our chair, Laura, has expressed wanting this to happen to both you and I a few times. It's just cleaner. And
Yes.
I'm glad the invoicing's working well. Before you got on, we talked about how when Robin was trying to reconcile the invoices and you'd have one child and it would cross so many different agencies and it was just so hard to rectify and make that work. So
Well, let me just say, I love it because from an accountability and legal perspective, it is infinitely cleaner to have an invoicing system as opposed to just a pure grant, pay the money up front system. So,
yeah, we sure had a lot of problems throughout the history of this with it not being the way it should be. This should eliminate it. And the bottom line is, what I've always wanted, and Robin's heard me echo this over and over, the welfare of the child should be coming first and it should be most paramount. And that's the part I hope doesn't get lost in this. I love what Sarah's doing with, you know, pulling all the agencies together, and Katie's group with the school, you know, are doing wonderful things. I just think that we need the accountability for the child. I mean, if an agency's supposed to be providing for the child and it's, you know, they're not getting counseling or they're not reunifying with parents and it's a month before they're seeing, somebody needs to be yelling about that.
Right.
We need to be getting a different service or we need to be doing something and somebody needs to be calling that to somebody's attention. I mean, the child's well-being should come before everything else. And that we know that the child already going through that PTSD is already has such a long shot for recovery to begin with, just the separation from the parent in the beginning or just going through the suffering of it in the beginning. But it's all of our job to try to find a way to lessen the impact. And if that agency that's getting funding from taxpayer dollars is doing a terrible job, and then they're having fundraisers taking money from citizens that think they're doing it right, and they're not, somebody should be screaming, no, they're not doing it right. And y'all shouldn't be going along with their wearing a long dress to their fundraiser and acting like they are. Don't go drinking their bourbon and saying they're doing it right, because they're not doing it right. That's just my 2 cents.
I do have another meeting, so I wanted to make sure there wasn't anything else you needed from me. But of course, I'm in agreement with all of you, and thank you for the clarification.
Well, Kim, what should the motion sound like?
Motion should be, candidly, a recommendation from the Forsyth County Social Security, that's funny.
Social
I've been doing
Security.
the Social Security issue this morning, Social Services Committee, that the board effectuate its termination. And then we'll put that on a work session.
Do I have a motion for that?
So moved.
Do I have a second? All right, I had a second from Ruth, but she was muted. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And that's any opposed? That is unanimous. So we will send that to the board. Dave or Ken, will y'all make sure?
Commissioner Mills
Got it.
dropped off.
No, I got a call and it just, will y'all make sure it gets on the next work session?
Ken, will you
Mr.
take care of
Dave,
that, or do you
I'll
want
add it.
us to?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll add it. That's fine.
All right, do I have a motion? Is there any other business to come before social service? I think we combined our agenda items. Hearing none, is there a motion to adjourn? Can y'all hear me?
Yes, I'll motion.
Moved.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? We are now adjourned. Thank y'all so much for all your efforts.
Thanks, guys.
Guys.
Bye.